talk about item 3 on the public properties agenda.
Hi. How you doing?
Oh, good.
You don't look any worse for wear. You look more relaxed.
No, I didn't even get a sunburn. I
No.
did really well with the sunshine.
How'd that happen?
I've learned my lesson after 35 years.
Are you ready?
Should be.
That sounds like a plan. All right, I call the meeting to order. Public property, first issue, Dwight Street vacation. Nick?
Yeah, Councilmember Chang had contacted me a while ago asking about a particular fence that he noticed being erected, or maybe it was reported to him. Anyway, there's a photo attached showing a fence going across the unopened Dwight Street right-of-way. Fred had asked me to look into that to figure out whether they needed to vacate that right-of-way or not, and there's some interesting legal history of street vacations in Washington. Essentially, there's case law. The legislature changed the law regarding unopened right-of-ways in 1909, and so any right-of-way that was platted in a county and which was unopened prior to 1905 is what the courts say is vacated as a matter of law. That doesn't mean that the assessor shows the right-of-way as being vacated, but I guess for all intents and purposes, it is vacated. But if somebody actually wants to show the vacation down the center line with each half of the right-of-way going to the adjacent owners, they still have to come through a normal vacation process with the city so that the county knows to start taxing that particular property. I provided a memo, and this is something that Carol had written. I forget what the purpose was, but she outlined streets and street vacations, and in that, on the second to last page, there's a...
When did we get, we got a frequently this questionnaire. We didn't.
Yeah.
Oh,
Sorry,
Okay.
yeah. The second to last page, she talks about a case, Gillis versus King County, and it talks about streets being vacated as a matter of law. And because a few of the plats that were recorded in Sydney or Port Orchard occurred prior to incorporation of the state and were in the county prior to incorporation of the city, they are captured in this street vacation provision where if something was unopened, it is considered vacated as a matter of law. However, those property owners, if they actually want to show their parcel as being to the center line of the right-of-way, still have to come through a process. But I think the question was, does the city need to do anything to notify these owners? And we have talked to now the owner on the other side and explained the situation to them, and they seem fine with it. But there was some concern that somebody was trying to take over an unopened right-of-way, whereas the right-of-way actually is vacated. And so,
does this, my question is, does this fence go over the center line so that it's actually on the adjacent property owner's
probably, but we haven't had it surveyed, and so what we told the adjacent property owner was, look, because this right-of-way is potentially vacated as a matter of law, this is potentially an adverse possession claim, and that you need to protect your half of the right-of-way.
Correct.
And so I think they were going to, consider sending a certified letter to the adjacent property owner saying, hey, your fence is encroaching on our portion of this right-of-way. And but whether they actually did that or not is, I'm not clear.
The reason I wanted this brought to this committee is because if you look at this map here, and we see the area that is hatch marked in red, a few years ago there was a similar area just to the north and the west, basically on Austin.
Okay,
between
is
Dwight and
this,
DeKalb.
is this the property we're talking about?
The orange area, yes.
Okay.
I thought it was red. So
It might have originally been.
okay, so basically this other section up here was vacated through what I call the old process, where both property owners were advised. And the property owner on this side, which is Crawford, Peterson, Dixon, and Yellish, the law firm,
Okay.
they purchased half of that. So it seemed to me that this process was now new, where we're saying, oh, it doesn't belong to us. It seems to belong to this owner only. So it's completely different to me. We charge the people for half of that I'm thinking, well, were they improperly charged? Do we, it
Right,
doesn't seem
why
like we're being
would the-
consistent, basically.
Why would the rule be different for
Right,
one and not?
Yeah, and I think that we would have to, I mean, I think you have to look at these things on a case-by-case basis with the plat, and I obviously wasn't there at the time that that was vacated, but if they were willing to pay for it and chose to do that, you know, maybe they didn't have to, but that was how the process was handled at the time. I don't think there's anything.
Yeah, so our process has changed.
I don't know that the process has changed. I think the process just needs to be handled on a case-by-case basis, and this needs to be in the back of people's mind is, you know, when was this thing platted? Was it in the county or the city? And does this sort of loophole apply in that particular circumstance?
So are we saying that this red area or orange area only belongs to one of the property owners and not both?
Nope.
No.
Actually, I looked at this, isn't there 3?
Because not
I'm
only
not
is the
saying what I'm
fence
saying.
over half of it, but they're planting, you know, I think it's great, they're planting cypresses all along that area.
That
Which
becomes
is-
a private matter, it becomes a civil court matter when there's an adverse
But there's the
possession between two
expectation of the
private
other
property
property owner that we would handle it the way we have in the past, and so that's what my concern is. They were expecting that we would inform them that this was happening and that they had.
Well, nothing is changing with the county assessor records at this time, and so if they would be informed if somebody applied to make that change legally on the maps and in the tax rolls.
So what we're saying, because they're choosing not to do it through proper channels, then they get a pass on it.
Or we're saying they
So-
don't have to go through proper channels.
The other private property owner, not the one putting up the fence, is certainly able to take this fence putting up property owner to a civil court and go through an adverse possession claim and divide the,
And
is-
we've made them aware of that.
Correct.
Have we done
this
it
is
right?
a private property matter, so.
We haven't done it in writing, but I don't know that the city ought to get involved in something like this when it's a dispute between two property owners. We try not to interject ourselves into these types of.
To clarify if it's 2 or 3 properties?
It would be, well, it would be 3 if, I think it's lots 1 and 8 are shown on there on the drawing.
It's,
And then it looks like the north side is all one ownership, so it's potentially 3 owners, but the owners of 1 and 8 may be the same or they may be
it's
different.
this one, and this one, right? These 3?
Correct.
Actually,
And
those
this
are
is the one that
specific
you've
owners.
talked to?
I believe that we have talked to 8.
Which one's 8?
Well, no, 8 is the one putting up the fence. I believe we've talked to the one that owns the
This
whole
one?
block. This one is 8. This one called to ask about it. This one is the one, oh, I'm sorry. No. This one is the one putting the fence up. That one called.
Well, I thought the fence was here. Are you saying it's here?
It's right on,
This is
it's
towards
right
the
on
Sydney side.
Sydney.
This is county.
Okay.
This number here, this number 1, that's the county. That's Kitsap County. This is Sherry Barnhart, and this is the Sydney
Okay.
Museum. Well, I just wanted to bring it to the council members' attention because it was news to me. It seemed a different way of vacating streets or not vacating streets, because I remember things like this coming to council for approval, and we would then sell off what we believed was part of our street. So it sounds like we're being told now that it's really not ours, it belongs to the property owner, and that we're not involved,
But there needs to be a clear distinction as to the amount of property of that vacated street that belongs to that property owner. I think that's the clarification the city needs to make.
Yeah. I agree.
So,
I think all 3 property owners should be told, according to the law, it's not ours, it's your guys's, but you need to figure out who's gonna do what. And I think we can because we've been asked to look into it. Even if it's just a letter to say you gotta go to the county and, you know.
and we're no longer doing
Yeah.
this.
no, they would still come to the city if they want this to be shown as a vacated right-of-way on the tax rolls. They would still come to the city and we would pass an ordinance officially vacating that so that the county would show that on the tax rolls.
Okay.
But,
Have they done that? Have they come to us and done
No,
that?
no.
They've just put up the fence on their own.
Yeah,
Is
and
that
and
the
when we
only
were
action
asked whether
that's
we need to do something with
Okay.
this, we just determined that this right-of-way is subject to this old law, and that we don't need to get involved in it at this point unless they come to us with that sort of request. So I'll talk to the attorney about whether we need to provide any other notice in this circumstance, or whether it's prudent to, but I don't even know that we ought to get involved if there's a potential adverse possession claim where one property owner is encroaching on another property owner's property. It seems to me that if you get involved, you're almost taking sides in.
I would just send the same letter to all three. I wouldn't recommend we take sides on whether anybody wants to or not want to take half that street or the other half that's not theirs.
Okay, well,
Fred's saying he was asked.
I think
for
we're already taking
information,
sides.
so
and
I
don't
think we
do
just
anything
give all three
actually.
property owners the same information. We were asked to look into this, this is what we found out, hands up in the air.
It's up to all three of you, and this is,
Yeah.
Right.
okay, well, I will draft something and have it reviewed by the attorney to send a notice to all three property owners.
Because the one property owner that's putting up the fence may not know that they are encroaching on someone else's property, and they need to be aware of that. They may think that it's automatically theirs.
Do we even know if it's encroaching? Because we don't have a survey.
I mean,
Yeah, that's where we're back to, it's a civil
well,
matter.
if
We
you
don't
look
know
at
if
it from the middle of the street, assuming that our streets are platted correctly, it is over half of that lot.
Right.
The fence is
But
going.
all of that is not official until it's surveyed. I mean, it's just conjecture at this point.
True,
It's
but I
over,
think it's
it's
good to
under.
let all three property owners know what's going on in case they didn't.
The process.
They may not have a problem with it. They may want to be on notice that they have to call their attorneys or just.
Next item, resident parking permit ordinance.
So this was originally brought to you guys a couple months ago with some minor changes, and after legal review and speaking with the chief, there's been some additional changes, and basically the additional changes in the residential parking permits, it was requested that we put our current process into the code, so everybody's clear as to how we process the residential parking permits. And then in addition, we were instructed to charge a administrative fee because it's a permit and you're required to have a fee associated with that. And so these numbers, the $6 and the $3 is estimated cost for staff to process a single permit. And then the theory is that if they're replacing it, it takes half the time to do that, so that's why the fee is half. So I'm not sure if you guys, if those fees are correct, you know, if that's what you want, more, round up.
I had a question specifically on fees on page 3 under community event parking permit. It's saying that if there's going to be a community event at a school or a church or something that's going to be in a residential neighborhood, they're going to have to get a permit for the day of the event. And there will be an administrative fee of $6 per vehicle for a community parking permit. I do not know how they're going to be able to determine, I think that's onerous. I don't know how they're going to be able to determine how many permits they are going to need. I mean, if you have something at, what's the name of the school? I mean, I'm just thinking if there's a school event, say at the high school, do they have to get permits for parking along the streets, and is that $6 per vehicle?
Yeah, and since I've been here, we've never had a community event parking permit issued, but doesn't mean to say that we're not gonna have one in the future.
Well,
but-
my neighborhood, as people can attest, especially Mr. Cartwright, on football games gets overrun with vehicles parking down the residential streets. And so, you know, what is our expectation in that? Or if the United Methodist Church has a wedding, do they have to get parking permits for anybody that's parking on the street? And then are we charging a $6 per fee vehicle? rate on that.
I mean, that's up to the council how they want to handle that part of it. I mean, if we want to issue it per vehicle or if we want one fee for everybody. But the only way that parking enforcement is going to issue it is based on license plate number. So we need a license plate number of each vehicle that's going to be participating in that event, so they're not issued a ticket.
But Brandy, that assumes that we're going to have enforcement, which is probably going to be on a weekend or after hours.
Correct. And I would assume that this is specifically meant for times that are
During
not
working
within
hours?
that, right.
Okay.
And that's probably why we've never had anything, because it usually happens in the evenings or the weekends or holidays and not in the middle of a work week. But that's a speculation. But yeah, absolutely, I can just do a fee up to number of vehicles, but staff will still be required to get license plate numbers and that type of thing, so. I mean, I don't think it makes a difference, but
Yeah, I don't think that's going to be possible.
yeah.
Again, if you have a wedding, are you going to ask all of your guests to bring in a license plate before they come in? I was thinking it would be more like the jury situation where they get so many jury placards and that goes in the windshield and they know.
Yeah,
so
we can
that-
put a limit, I mean.
So that there could be like if there's a wedding, they just get a thing that says guest of United Methodist and they've got a permit for the day. I mean, it seems to me there needs to be, that could be handled less onerous than what we've made it out
So
to.
by
Could it
permit.
be, well, could it be part of the public event process? How
Well, these
many-
aren't public events.
Well, but, I know, but
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of,
Well, yeah, I'm confused about this.
Well, yeah, and then when you think about the Little League and Babe Ruth having big games up
They're
there.
not taking out permits to do
and the
their
football.
activity. So if they don't take out a permit for their activity, then we don't know about it, so we wouldn't. So this is when they take out a community event type permit, okay.
Yeah, they're proactive and they're saying,
Okay,
hey, I'm gonna
right.
have 10 to 20, 30 vehicles, I want something. And at that point, we can say, oh, okay, we'll give you 30, we'll print out 30 permits for you to hand out or whatever, and I don't know if there's a limit, but yeah, we can do it per event.
Then we would need it defined when they need a permit and when they don't need a permit.
As in the type of event, or?
Correct.
More than school, civic, and community event, so, like, you want me to specifically say wedding and,
Well, again, I'm going back to events that are community events that are held at schools. And
But they don't take out a permit for, right.
Right, so I'm saying we need to define when they need the
Right.
permit.
I wouldn't even think a wedding would be a public community event,
Well-
it's a private invitation.
They may not think they need a permit to.
Yeah, but let's go back to the high school football game. I mean, how's that been working for years where, the turf dedication game, people were parking all over the place. It was insanely crowded.
I don't think we made them take out a permit, did we?
no, like
Yeah.
I said, we've never
No.
issued
It's
a community
It's just
event
a
in the last
free-for-all
8
kind
years
of
I've been
a
here,
parking
so,
thing.
yeah.
So has the city ever fielded complaints from homeowners about, I can't park in front of my house on a Friday night game?
Not from me, maybe from the police department, but
The schools never came to you for a permit, have they?
nope.
No, and that's what I'm saying. I'm saying if we're going to require a permit for a community event, we need to define what community events those are, so that
Well,
there's
isn't this
no
our old-
confusion.
Yeah, it's our old code, I mean, do you think?
We have
it's-
it, it's 10-14-050, and it says events such as school, civic, that's the old code.
Do you think that this
So
section
wait a
is no
second.
longer needed? Do you think maybe it was just?
You wanna take it out?
Could be confusing if it's left in, but I'm not. If it's not been an issue to date, maybe the better thing to do is just to take it out and
Community
rely on
event.
the event application for those other types of issues where, what is the definition?
So it's already defined as one-day permit valid and issued by the city for participants of a public community event held in a residential neighborhood such as civic, church, or school meeting or conference. So I guess this is probably where we would maybe define more what a community event is. But I mean, are we gonna list the type of event, like a football game and those type of things? I'm just not sure if we wanna get too specific, because if it doesn't fall into that, then, maybe they're having a basketball game or a soccer game, or, and we could say sports event, but then what if they're having a debate event, So I'm just, I'm just stuck as to how
Well,
detailed you
and
want me
that's,
to be.
and that was my question, I'm bringing this up, and then we were charging $6 a vehicle.
Yeah, so that probably doesn't make
What concerned me was
sense.
that we were charging $6 a vehicle to process it.
So maybe that doesn't make sense and it's per event, or do we not even do per event anymore?
It would only make sense if they were doing it during business hours and they were taking away parking from shoppers or something, but
No, because this is in a residential, the community event under definition is specifically in residential neighborhoods.
so it rarely happens.
Yeah, and it's not even in all residential areas, it's only in the section of the code that's defined as residential parking permit zone,
Oh.
which is in,
Downtown, basically.
and by the courthouse.
Okay,
By the
that's
school
not
district.
how I read that
You thought
definition.
it was anywhere in the city?
Yes,
Yeah.
so that would need to be clarified too.
And the only reason why I say that is because it says that a residential parking permit means valid within, where does it say? There's a different section in here that says it's, I think I wrote it down.
It's, well, residential area means any area contiguous to a public right-of-way which is zoned R4.5, R8, R12, or R20.
Okay.
So your definitions need to be consistent.
I know that there's a section of title, let me see, did I add that in there?
This is only applicable to the residential areas that actually have a parking permit zone. Fall within the zone.
Okay, so it says here residential parking permits, 101430B. Eligible recipients for a residential parking permit shall be a person residing in the residential parking permit as defined by the council in action accordance to the Port Arthur Municipal Code 10.12.560. And that is the no parking, standing, stopping, the one that Mark updates every year. So I guess since it defines here a certain section, then that section of the code needs to be put up here in the definitions as well. So yeah, I see. So it has a zoned as in the zoning code, and then also has this as defined in the parking, so there needs to be, it's one or the other. So does the council prefer if it's a straight zone, or if they want to pull it out of the parking, stopping, standing ordinance? Which means that if you just do zone, then it could be technically, I don't know what McCormick Woods zoning is, but if it's any of those, then it would be allowed to have residential parking in there, and historically, we don't have parking permit system out there. So I guess this probably needs to be updated to reflect the,
I don't think you can park in the street in McCormick Woods.
okay,
I think they have their own HOA rules about where you can park,
okay.
which side of the street and all of that, so.
But if there's an ordinance saying that they can, as long as there is zoning, so we need to amend this zoning ordinance to say that it's pursuant to the, no parking standing permit one, right?
Or it excludes McCormick or something.
Well, it's not just McCormick's, it would also be over by Sydney. I mean, it could be anywhere that's not, I think it was designed just for the downtown core area and over by the high school, so I'll clean this up. Make sure it's,
I support the permit going from 5 years to 2 years, and we've talked about it. I think the $6 and $3 is reasonable, but I don't think it's going to be popular. Currently, people have to submit an application anyway to get their permit, and they do it in person, or they can do it by mail, or maybe online or something.
for renewals, we can have them do it, by mail, but for new ones, they have to come in, because they have to show proof of ID, so,
If they had one before, is that considered proof of ID? If they had a permit before, is that? It's just that every 2
Yeah, we
years,
pull up the previous application and see if it's been issued before.
or every 2 years, they have to bring in a utility bill or something,
Mhm.
or provide a
Proof of
copy.
residency. Mhm.
So we don't charge now,
Correct.
and the recommendation is to charge.
Legal counsel said because it's a permit, we're required to charge at least a administrative fee for any permits issued, and it's just
What-
for
So that
processing.
we're talking about two separate things, permit fee and a parking fee per
Right.
car. So what do you guys want to do for permit fee? Is that $6 sound reasonable, $5,
Dollars for
$2?
2 years. Sounds pretty reasonable to me.
It could be anything we want to set.
Right,
It can be
I don't
separate.
have a problem with the $6. Did you do an analysis as to how long it takes you and the $6? But
It was like 530 something, 522, so I just rounded it up.
But
to
I don't
6.
understand, what's the other fee for parking? I mean, isn't the only fee the permit?
It's, yeah,
Well, shouldn't we then change the wording so that it reflects that this is a $6 fee for that permit? And kind of, I too don't really think that, I think it's onerous too. How would you know who's gonna show up at your party? And how would you get their license numbers and everything if it's a wedding or something on a church street?
oh, you're talking about the community part of it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that really needs to be fleshed out.
Yeah, and I'm also just jumping back to the basic part, because this is only gonna affect the people in the downtown area, like my neighbors and Rob's neighbors, and Cindy's and Jerry's, who park on the street. I personally think the fee is reasonable, and I know it's higher in other cities like Los Angeles. I'm more concerned about the convenience of people just applying for it. I would like to do it when you're not open, so by mail or online, maybe have a check or pay by card. I think when you're requiring people to come in during working hours and do this process to get the permit, and you guys have been really flexible in the clerk's
Oh, yeah.
office.
Yeah, when
But
we
I'd
did this
like
5
that to
years
be
ago,
part
we
of
did that, yeah.
the announcement that goes out, letting them know the more convenient ways to take care of the process and the payment. You'll need to take cards probably.
Yeah, that's,
Or
yeah,
people can drop
I don't
off
know, that's
cash in the
finance.
box,
I'll
or-
just double check with them on, I think we take everything but Visa, but
Okay.
then you're charged a fee for the card use as well, but.
But I would like under community event parking permit, I would like more dialogue, more discussion, more input on what that truly is. And again, I'm not supportive of a $6 per vehicle fee in
So
that.
per event, maybe.
And I would like, I believe the community event and who requires a permit needs to be defined.
So I'll bring this back to November's work study session, or public event, or public properties, okay.
Okay, last item. Meredith Building Sick.
I would like to make some comments before we start this section. And I have a handout for you. And I have a handout for Fred. I have a handout for Nick. And then I have one for myself. I also have another handout for Fred, and Jeff is
Background.
committee members, yes. And I'm going to read that page into the record that I just gave Jeff. And it reads, "It was with confusion and surprise that I read an article in the Kitsap Sun regarding the politicization of the derelict building matter. According to the Kitsap Sun article, the instruction for staff to work on a derelict building order came from the mayor. The Community Development Department advised me that a council member requested the ordinance. And it has been reported to me that at a political forum, council candidate Nick Whittleton stated he met with Nick Bond and initiated this ordinance. All of these actions are outside the established council committee process. The tail does not get to wag the dog, and the political agenda of candidates does not have the right to disrupt the established council committee process. The council's job is to set policy It is an important role approached with seriousness. It is not to be politicized or treated as a game. The council members' handbook published by the AWC and MSRC and provided by the city cautions the council, quote, "Do not be stampeded into action by the demands of special interest group. Your job is to find the long-term public interest of the entire community," end quote. The work of the Public Property Committee and the Economic Development Committee will not be compromised. I then have the handout that I gave my two council members, and Nick outlines the council committee process. Issues are assigned to a committee. The committee, with input and support from staff, complete due diligence on the subject. The committee makes recommendations to full council at work study for discussion and direction. The issue then moves back to the committee for forward action. This process is thorough and has worked historically well. The derelict building issue. Council requested that our city attorney author a white paper on what action the city can and cannot take regarding derelict buildings. The mayor blocked the request, citing these funds were not in the legal budget. The committee requested the community development director to see if the attorney already had such a white paper or the cost to have one prepared. I then have an outline of the time frame for the derelict building issue. In October, the committee requested status of the white paper. Is one available? If not, what is an estimated cost for preparation so we can receive approval from the council for the expenditure? In October, the committee requested a report from Code Enforcement Officer on the current process he follows to include the number of potential affected buildings and general information regarding the condemnation process. In November, this committee will have the white paper available hopefully prior to meeting, so the committee will have time to review it. We will then in November begin our due diligence. Is an ordinance necessary? If so, what elements are important to have in the ordinance? December, the preliminary ordinance available for the committee review with possible action to take to work study for full council review or back to staff for input with new information. And then in January would be the earliest potential council action. I go on to state that this issue is not an emergency. Council has many matters to complete within the next couple of months, including water sewer, traffic impact fees, transportation benefit district, and the annual budget. The derelict building issue does not warrant special attention or needs to be disruptive to our full agenda. The committee has been seeking a sign ordinance for over a year. Again, the derelict building issue does not supersede the sign code.
That's pretty succinct to me.
I don't know if I've seen it yet. Haven't seen either one of those documents. But I do want to interject in here that the committee doesn't give instructions to staff. I do. And I haven't seen any of this timeline and.
No, I just presented it.
Yeah. Normally, the way you would do that is present it to me, so I would have a chance to talk about it with you
No,
now.
it is not. This is a committee issue. This issue
No, it
was
is not.
presented to
It
the
is not a
committee.
committee issue. It's bigger than a committee issue. Yes, it is.
That is not how this city has functioned.
I don't
in
care
the
how
past.
this city has functioned, but the way it functions is I'm the administrator. So
And
you
we
don't
set
order staff
policy.
to do, no, you don't order staff to do anything.
No one is ordering staff to
It
do
sounds
anything,
like
Mayor.
it. I don't
No,
know.
we
Let
are
me look
not.
at-
We
let me-
are setting out a
If
timeline.
possible, I would like to have a copy of what you read into the record. No, I'm not gonna read it right now. I want
You can have
it,
my copies.
I want it when everybody else gets it.
This is all the further it's going.
Well, on the contrary, it's gonna go farther than this, but I will answer this. But at this point,
I see it as a communication issue because I certainly agree that there's certainly has been a process. And mixed in with your bullet points, though, is I'm not gonna say conjecture, but sort of opinion of how you feel it should be in the future, in addition to how it's been in the past. I think that hopefully we can maybe talk through this. There do seem to be issues that we are hearing about sources other than the city, and there's one not related to this that I emailed you about separately. But so I think that we can probably improve by having discussion and a conversation about it. It does seem that we're getting mixed messages about the derelict building ordinance, so I can see where this would have been.
I did ask Nick to look into a derelict building ordinance.
Yeah,
And I have every authority to do that.
Yeah,
I don't need you guys
No,
to
and
tell me to do it or instruct me to do it.
Yeah, my concern is.
And then
Sure.
my idea was we'd come back to the council and present what we don't have, what we do have, what it will cost, and all of that. Once again, it will happen when we can work it into our schedule, and that's Nick's, mine, and the attorney's call. So everybody asking for when's the report isn't gonna speed it up in one iota. Right now, we do have other things that are in the mill, that are higher priority, and we're working through them.
The agenda of this particular committee is set by the committee. And this committee was, well, actually, I brought it up at Economic Development last month, and it moved to this committee this month. But we had asked at that point for a white paper. Nick was going to bring back additional information. I was then, have been out of town, and when we got the agendas, or request for agendas for our public property meeting and our economic development meeting, a derelict building ordinance was placed on the agenda, and at that point, I didn't know that was in works because I had been out of the country. And I had a conversation. I asked that the status of the white paper be put on the agenda. And that's what I'm referring to here, because we had asked Nick to check and see if one was already available. And then I was also told at that time that the code requested that the code enforcement officer be, and he is here, so that we can discuss how he handles this process now, so that council can start doing its due diligence. The actual ordinance and the mayor's direction to staff, I don't care about. What I do care about is reading in the paper that the process or an issue in front of this committee is being politicized. And that troubles me.
Well, and I'd like to comment on that because no council candidate, I met with Nick Whittleton, but no council candidate has directed me to work on this. When somebody asked about whether we would consider a derelict building ordinance, I said that the mayor has already instructed us to work on one, and we, through code enforcement, have been working on that for the last couple of weeks. Doug, in my absence, which I was also out of the country for the last 2 weeks, and when the paper emailed me to comment on this, I didn't have the ability to respond. So they printed an article without my input. But we do have a derelict building ordinance that we have drafted. It's come from staff to the attorney, back to staff, and now it's at the attorney again. And right now where we're at with this is that we have a rough draft that we're trying to get ready per the mayor's instruction by October 27th for consideration. And whether that's
Consideration for who?
By who?
to bring it to the city council.
The full council?
Yes.
'Cause it's my understanding the council wanted that issue vetted through this committee. Wasn't that brought up at a council meeting?
I don't know that the full council ever said that the Public Properties Committee should study this particular issue. But I know that the public has commented on MyRees, and a lot of this started with a discussion of MyRees. And so I think that there's a couple of different discussions that are taking place that are related and sort of moving in a parallel track. But
There's a lot of different moving parts here, I understand that, but it was brought up in economic development. I thought when subcommittee members briefed the full council on some of the issues that were brought up, I recall that.
Is that the last council meeting
Yeah.
when you reported? Yeah. And so that was a report to the full council, but I don't know that the full council
And I can't imagine, quite honestly, an ordinance coming forward to council without it going through work study first.
Whatever the ordinance is.
Well, even if it
Whatever
came
the
to the
ordinance.
full council, it could then go to work study in November. So, to me, it's like, whenever it's
Well, I
available.
don't, no, I disagree with that, Fred, in that I do not think that we should be talking about a ordinance or at a full council meeting without it going through work study first,
Or a subcommittee.
or a subcommittee. And before it gets to the work study, it has to be vetted through the subcommittee. And there's a lot of due diligence for us to do before it gets to the full council.
I agree. I think that is the ideal process. I wish I could say that's happened with every ordinance, and it hasn't always because of time constraints. In something like this, though, if it came to the full council, not seeing a time constraint, we could it might be then passed on to the next work study. To me, it's like it will probably go through that process, even if it doesn't go through the steps as we expected.
Yeah, and I think, I guess there's, the issue here is that we have had a lot of inquiries, especially in the last 6 weeks, concerning the Myries building specifically, and we're looking at the tools that we have in the toolbox for dealing with that. And the question becomes, do you want a complete process with council committee involvement, then work study involvement, then council action?
Yes.
Which then
Definitely.
delays any action on Myries potentially until
Well, my
later rather
understanding is
than
there's
earlier.
already been some action on Myers.
Well, and that we have made contact with Myries, and Doug had a conversation with the owners, and so we may be getting action on that outside of going through
An
an
ordinance.
abatement process. So we may not need the tool to actually compel the owner to do something, because they may be willing to do it without such an order. But right now, the issue is that we don't have the tool that we need
See,
to deal with that.
that to me is the biggest concern. You just mentioned something to me that's the biggest concern, and that's an abatement process. How did we get there? How did we get there without council's input?
We're working on it. And
Who's
we'll bring
we?
it to you.
What do you mean?
Staff,
What do
the
you mean?
experts, the people that know
You're-
what they will need.
Well, we're asking for that information.
We're just telling you.
Well-
He just,
So you're
The,
telling me, I mean, this, abatement process.
We already
Pretty
have
serious.
adopted. Yeah, I think we
I'd like
should
to
give
hear
you some
from Doug,
background.
actually.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I think I kind of partly triggered some of this, because we do have an abatement code, a dangerous building abatement code and procedure. I don't know exactly how it's been applied in the past, but it's based on the 1997 Uniform Code for the Abatement of Dangerous Buildings. In my prior training, I was taught that there's a state law that prescribes a different process, and my instruction was that it was mandatory that you follow that particular process. So when things came up with Myries and we felt we had an urgent situation, and I looked and said, we don't have the tools to deal with that urgent situation because this code doesn't comply with this state law. We started looking at it. Our attorney's opinion is that state law, that particular process is not mandatory. It's an optional process. So we don't have to go to that procedure, but there are still, as we look further, there are still some deficiencies with the Uniform Code for the Abatement of Dangerous Buildings. So what we're looking at is coming up with a code at the time with urgency, because we felt we had an emergent situation, which fortunately has been at least partly resolved. They have been, the initial avenue of communicating with them wasn't working, and that was partly where the urgency was coming in. Going through a different avenue, I'm in contact with the owners. They're being very responsive. They've already addressed the emergency concerns. So that particular one has gone away. There are other dangerous buildings in the area that are of concern, but that was the most urgent one. So we've been looking at how do we make sure that the tool we have, that the tool that we have actually follows all the legal requirements. The Uniform Code for the Abatement of Dangerous Buildings pretty much prescribes a summary process. You send a notice and order of abatement. There is a prescription for a Board of Appeals, which we don't really have. There's a Board of Building Code Appeals in name only, but that has never met. And then that board can appoint a hearing examiner that then holds a hearing, and it goes back and forth. And, but if nobody appeals that, then pretty much the city can just go and do the abatement. And then it comes back to the council to, after the fact, approve the costs that have been spent for recovery from the property owner. So it doesn't take you to where most of that should be handled, which is Superior Court. You should be going to Superior Court for a warrant of abatement, and then Superior Court is the one that reviews the costs and issues a judgment. So that's what we're trying to get to, is something that clearly, number one, doesn't prescribe a process that we don't have, and then clearly prescribes a process that follows all the legal requirements, that references the state nuisance abatement laws. And so that's what we've been going back and forth with, drafting between myself and the attorney. And what we have now is a proposal to basically merge that with the public nuisance code, which really needs work also, because it was something I picked up from Kathy when I came on, and she had me looking at some of her casework and saying, do you agree that I don't have the tools here that I need? And I said, yeah, there's nothing here. We have these complaints, and the nuisance code just does not address them. For instance, dangerous trees, we can address dangerous trees if they threaten street trees or public sidewalks, but not if they're ready to fall on the neighbor's house. So, you know, some really significant problems there. So we're looking at merging those two codes with a rewrite of the new public nuisance code.
I have a couple comments at this point. One is, it sounds like the codes that you have mentioned over the year that truly need to be updated, that these fall within that. And, you know, where were they in your priority of getting updated? Because, you know, that's part of what I thought you had been working on this last year. The other question, and I really appreciate your comments, Doug, the other things that have been brought to my mind as you spoke is the lack of education that these three, I'm assuming these three, at least myself, council members need to be brought up to speed in order to establish and create appropriate policy. And so the education piece, this due diligent piece that we need to do, is critical. And I very much appreciate it, and it brings more questions to my mind. But you've been working on your code, and so this to me would just be part of that process.
Well, the nuisance code, while it's on the radar, it wasn't one of the 5 major issues that were
Correct.
recommended by the
Okay.
attorney to address immediately, and it was
Okay.
kind of on the back burner. The urgency, and I think the thing that hasn't been said yet, is that we did receive a formal complaint about a building that the Myries building actually has an overhang over a public sidewalk, so part of the building is in the right-of-way, and there was a concern for public safety. And so what we did was we had our consultant who does backup building inspections, who's a certified building official. I said, can you come look at this and tell me whether or not we have a safety hazard, because we're concerned that either the rock facade on the front of the building or part of the overhang may be unsafe. And so when we looked at that, we said, you know, we need to take responsibility for this urgently, and that's what we've been working with the owner of the building to address. But at that time, we felt we didn't have the tools in the toolbox to deal with something that was within our right-of-way. That's part of the reason that this escalated to a higher priority issue, was that we were dealing with a specific complaint about something on the public right-of-way. But as far as how we handle this process going forward, obviously.
Well, I wanted to weigh in on that real quick. There's 3 things. The first thing is staff needs to write the code. We're working on it. Staff, not the committee. 2, the attorney needs to look at the code that staff recommends and see that it meets law. Attorney, not the committee and not the mayor. 3, we'll bring that to you at the council meeting, and they can do whatever they want. Not the committee, because it takes 4 council people. you're not gonna run the show. You can't. 3 council people, that's why committee's set up with 3. We'll bring it to the full council. They can either put it in your committee, do a special hearing, say we don't care, we don't have a good code, we're not gonna do it. I don't care what happens to it after that. But we're gonna bring a complete code to you, then you can make the decision.
Again, that's circumventing the.
I don't
the
care
co-
if it's
the
circumventing or
committee-
if not.
The committee process
No,
that
it's
we
not.
have always used. And
Well-
that is of concern to me. But what's important to our citizens is that we function well and that we provide the best codes we can. And I disagree
Sure, I
with
agree
you
with that.
in that the policy is the function of the legislative branch or our council. And what's in those codes is policy. And our input is critical. And I do not understand why this particular issue would be taken out of the normal flow of committee work. And it's Jeff's committee. Jeff perhaps has some input on that.
I'd like to ask the one question that, the complaint about the overhead on the sidewalk. Has it been addressed? I heard that the emergency issue is no longer an issue. So this is no longer an emergency.
That particular emergency
This-
has been.
So the
yes.
Myries issue is no longer an emergency.
Right.
Derelict building issue is no longer an emergency. So why are we ramrodding this? We've asked for a year and a half for right-of-way issues and signage issues downtown. We've heard from the citizens for a year and a half about banners and signs and right-of-way and tables and chairs on sidewalks. This issue is no longer an emergency. Why is this getting ramrodded when the issues that the citizens have wanted for a year and a half still aren't addressed?
Let me answer that.
That's my first question. I
All right,
have
let me
another
answer your
question.
first question, then you can ask your second question. First answer is, we have started this process, and we're going to see it through to a code that we can bring to the council.
For the sidewalk issue?
No. Derelict, dangerous building.
Oh, I thought you were answering his
No,
question.
I am answering his question. He's going, why are we still worried about this? Because maybe 4 days ago it was still important, now it's not, so we drop it. No, we're not gonna drop it. We've already issued, we've already got time invested. We've already done a lot of background work on it. So this is my determination. We will see it through to a recommended code for that. What you guys do with it after that is completely up to you as the administrator, as
I believe,
legislator.
I'm going to, you are politicizing this because you want it on the agenda before the election. And that's the bottom line.
Well, I disagree.
It has nothing to do with anything
Well,
else.
your point is well taken, but I disagree. So anyway, that's the answer to your question. We're gonna go ahead and bring something to the council and say, hey, this code needs to be improved. This is what we recommend.
And when are you bringing that forward, Mr. Mayor?
We just talked about it, probably, hopefully by,
It's,
I was asked to schedule a public hearing and bring it forward for the 27th of October.
And we have a council meeting tomorrow?
Yes, we do.
Fine, I'll make a motion at tomorrow's meeting that this should be worked through this committee.
I will
That
second
what?
that.
I'm just gonna make a motion that this issue be worked through this committee.
And you can present my timeline because
And I will.
it's an aggressive timeline with other issues that we've had.
Any other business for this meeting?
Yes, I wanted on the agenda, on public properties is the status and where we are with 640 Bay Street, because that is another item that this committee is working on, and that is the options and the status of because what we were charged with is what can we do with 640 Bay Street, and we need to continue moving that forward. And at our last meeting, we had a discussion on that, and we had questions about fencing, and they were to get back with costs on fencing and doing some things, and we were going to begin a discussion on what the potentials were with that. And, you know, were we gonna put it up for sale? What were some of our partnership opportunities? We were asked by council to vet that. And so I think that should be a constant agenda item on public properties until we get through that process.
We haven't had time to do a whole lot with it since the last meeting, partly because I was out of the office for 2 weeks, but we did close on the property, I think.
Not
we
yet.
did. I thought I got a closing statement.
We have a closing statement, but I haven't signed the
Oh.
deed, actually.
So I think it's,
It's in the process of closing, yeah.
gotcha. Yeah, I just went through my email on Friday, so I'm still getting caught up, but, you know, between now and next meeting, I can certainly work on that, and
We
we'll
were
have it on the
concerned that
next
if it
agenda.
were sold, that we wouldn't have any say over how quickly it were developed. And so we were wondering if there were other options that we could still retain an interest in the property and get it developed in a more aggressive timeframe. And we mentioned that, you know, some council members just want to be rid of it. They didn't want to buy it, so they want to sell it. But if we sell it, it may just sit there empty. And that's what we were concerned about. So if we asked if there were other options that we could.
What's the hurry? That's what I ask everybody, what's the big hurry?
No,
right?
exactly, but some council members, you know, maybe not a majority, but they didn't like it, they want to sell it. And we just want to be able to say, well, if we sold it, it may be empty for many years because it's no longer our property and we have no say over what happens to it.
And I
that's not
believe that
really
we
what want.
we had at one point looked at just even simulated graphics of what could be there. And I know that you had questions about that particular exercise brought up density questions. And so doing something with 640 Bay Street may prompt other issues that we need to look at. And so we want to address all of those going forward. And that's why I think it needs to be a standing agenda item so that we don't lose it.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, the simulation did backfire because some people thought it would look exactly like the simulation. And they did not, no, they really
Yeah,
did.
Right.
you're right.
You remember that, so we would caution against the simulation.
Well, my intern is leaving, so I don't have the
If I
ability to do
remember
that.
correctly, the simulation was just
Yeah, it was,
one of many suggestions that might be
well,
considered.
I understood it as a conceptual, and it was not
Yeah,
going
and
to
it was
look like
just
that
an
in any
idea.
way,
It
but
was one idea.
not everyone understood that.
So that's long-term discussion on 640, but I thought in the near term, we were gonna have a cost analysis done between refencing it or removing the fence and making the
Correct.
property safe for
Right.
a day.
Mark's been working on
Mark's been working on that. He's preliminarily got something. We'll have to get it in writing and send it out, but latter part of last week.
So you want a discussion on the short term of the property, of
Well,
securing it, and then the long term?
Correct, that's
We had,
right.
we had a discussion on whether or not it was gonna be turned into a pocket park, excuse me. Because the current fencing wasn't very secure, I think, if I remember right in that. So it was either put up secure fencing so people don't fall off the sidewalk onto the,
Right, well, the other thing that I'm remembering, that fencing that was all up there was done by the,
Belongs to the contractor.
Yeah, it's
right,
rental.
belongs to the contractor, it's not ours and it's all rented, and so we're going to have to do something. And so what were the costs on that? And it sounds like, I don't know whether that fencing would just disappear once it's closed.
They're gonna give us, I think, 2 weeks or something, but we're gonna need to take action pretty quickly.
Yeah, yeah, so anyway, I just felt that that needs to be.
Our
a
liability
constant.
starts the day I sign the papers. When the deed's signed, that's when the liability starts. They may say they're giving us 2 weeks to leave the fence up, but it's still our liability as soon as I sign the papers.
all right, anything else, public property?
Oh, I just had one comment on your memo. The white paper derelict building issue, it says council requested the attorney author a white paper.
No, well, council member-
Council members.
Council members,
Okay,
correct.
but not the whole, not on behalf.
Not
of
the, not on behalf of the whole council, no.
And that was, I have a question on that too. You know, I have never talked to the attorney. My idea back then, when we had that conversation, was you wanted a white paper on things you didn't know based on a question somebody asked you downtown. So I really needed to talk to the attorney and get more specific than that. What is, if you would send me just an outline like you have of this derelict building, of all the white paper stuff that you want from her.
What I
and also the
specifically-
deliverables that you're
Yeah,
expecting.
what I specifically asked last time was to know what we can and can't do with the derelict buildings or the neglected buildings in town. You know, that was our starting point. Because at that point, we had had several citizens come and give testimony at council meetings. And my question was, I don't know what we can and can't do. I don't know what is within our laws, you know, what our code says. And at the last economic development meeting, I specifically asked for a white paper on what we can and can't do. A summary, and maybe it would have been a summary of the state law, maybe it would have been a summary of our particular ordinance. Yes, you can listen to the tape.
I will listen.
Because that's
Because that's not
what
the
I
way I
asked.
understand it. I'll get exact what was said.
I followed up on that with unintended consequences.
Correct.
Be removed with whatever we currently have. And again, I'm gonna reiterate, I'm concerned about abatement issues and potential legal issues we find ourselves in if we push on issues that we don't fully understand.
Stand, correct. That's my concern.
Okay, public property is closed. 5 minutes, or do you want to jump in the next one?
Thank you,
Well, I
Doug.
think she has to change the tape out.
Thank you.
Don't, I mean, we can't.
Oh,
sometimes we
I
do
thought
just
you
keep
did.
them on
Okay.
continuous tape.
Thank you, Doug.
Check, just make sure we know. We don't want to find out we're out of tape and
Take 5 minutes.
Yeah, let's take 5 minutes.
What's that?
Is it a DVD?
Yeah.